Okay. Oh, thanks. Okay. With that in mind, all right, I shall not waste much time. I leave it to Sui to introduce our speaker. Sui, all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Gobi. So for our speaker today, we have Mr. Michael Harkins. Some of you may know him from the DCO webinar we organized last year. So Mr. Michael Harkins, right, is the director for anti-doping testing at Sport Integrity Australia. He has been in this role since November 2020, and he joined the Australian Sports Anti-Doping Authority in 2018 as the advisor to the Chief Executive Officer. So previously, Michael has worked in government positions for over 10 years and has experience in leading teams responsible for the delivery of customer service, executive support, communications, sports engagement, and anti-doping operations. Michael is passionate about sports and will give any sport a try. So without further ado, let's welcome Mr. Michael for the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. Just confirming everyone can hear and see my screen. Excellent. That's what we like to hear. It's always nice to see lots of faces going up and down all at once. So it's lovely to see. Good morning. Welcome everyone, and thank you all for coming. As mentioned, this was thrown together pretty last minute, but it's a really important piece of work. And I want today to be really conversational. So if anyone does have any questions, please don't hesitate just to throw your hand up or just start yelling at me. I'm not in any way precious when it comes to that. I think online team meetings have created this sense of everyone sitting around waiting till the end. If anyone wants to jump in on any point, please don't hesitate. I have over my shoulder my national training coordinator with me, who Miss Adele, and so she will also assist me at some points through today if I start wafting or start talking about things that are not relevant. So she'll keep me on track, which is always nice. But so I just wanted to quickly start by acknowledging that what we do and what you do, we all share exactly the same challenges. And it's an important piece to touch on, in a sense that what you're going through is exactly what we go through, and that there's an opportunity here for every single person in this space to actually start talking to each other and to work through these solutions together. So I often sit here and think to myself, how am I going to fix that? Odds are someone else in this world has actually already done that and faced that challenge. So I just really like to start by acknowledging that we all share some very common challenges. And I think looking at the screen and seeing all your faces reading these, I can't imagine that any of these are not new to anyone. They are very consistent in relation to the challenges that we all face in this space. Just a quick overview of my team. So we're very fortunate. Obviously here we have resources that we really do dedicate and throw at our anti-doping testing program. So we have there, obviously, my team is ultimately responsible for the anti-doping testing program. So my sport operations side of the house are our test planners. So they identify which athletes to test, when to test, and how to test. And then we have our field operations side of the house that collect the samples across the country in accordance with the policies and procedures that we have. I mentioned earlier that I have Adele with me today, who's our national training coordinator. And our structure also has some state managers. So obviously Australia being a big and diverse and spread out country, the ability for us to manage our staff by having one person at head office won't necessarily work. So we have state managers that are located in the major states and territories across Australia that manage the relationship with our sample collection personnel. And then obviously we have the 150, I'll say ish, staff members, because it does change on a pretty regular basis with staff coming on and off. So just some quick stats about our testing program so that everyone can have a bit of an understanding. So we average around 5,500 samples a year. And it's a mix of both government funded and user pay. As everyone aims to get to, 70% are collected out of competition. And obviously our test distribution is all based on risk as we're required to be compliant with WADA. So I'll just skim across some of that very quickly, but just important to note. So getting to the nuts and bolts of today, the kind of accreditation framework and why it's really important. So obviously our field staff, we recognise that they really truly are the first face of the agency, and as such carry huge reputational ability and risk, but also positive reputational as well. And so it's really important that we invest in those staff members and that they really truly are representative, and what we want them to be is that personable and professional employee. So we invest a lot of time and effort in making sure that our first face is really carrying a good, strong brand for our agency. As mentioned earlier, we have 150 distributed all across Australia, so in each state and territory, and we have them split into kind of two distinct roles, as you'd all be aware, our DCOs and chaperones. Our DCO cohort, if I'm to be completely honest, is light on. So that's one of the strategic challenges that I'm going to be having over the next couple of months, is actually recruiting some more DCOs. And looking at some of the countries here, I know that some of you may actually have more DCOs than us. You know, it is a challenge that we do have in finding that right person to be able to do it. But there's obviously a lot of countries here that might have a lot less than us as well. But my view is, you have one or you have 50, you have to have the same policies and procedures in place to make sure that you're able to manage it. And that's really what our staff accreditation framework does. So what makes us different to some other countries is that our sample collection personnel are government employees. So they're not contractors, they're not a private sample collection agency. They are Sport Integrity Australia employees that we pay, that are government employees. They are casual staff, however, so I'm hopefully not speaking something that not everyone knows, but, you know, we pay them per hour, so we kind of give them no guarantees of work. We can't tell them that you're going to work 20 hours next week. We offer them a shift and say, do you want to work next Thursday? And they can say yes or no, and they have no rights or obligations in terms of having to do that work, or even saying no. We don't kind of grill them over that. So no commitments from anyone to accept or deny work. We don't have blood collection officials, which is interesting, because I know a lot of countries do have their own BCOs and qualified BCOs. That is an area that we are looking to get more into, but at the moment it really is, we engage a third-party provider to do that work for us, just relying on their skills. We don't quite have the assessment process in place yet to verify skills of a blood collector, and the ability to do that is one of the things we're working through. So touching on our kind of shared challenges earlier, these are just some of the things that kind of kept me up at night in this role. And when I say kept me up at night, it really did. Some nights I'd be laying in bed thinking, how am I going to make this work? And I'm sure you've all been there. But kind of what we did to address this, and the number one thing there was, I cannot stress this enough, was that we didn't try and do this ourselves. As I mentioned earlier, there are people that do this and do this well, and you might have to chat to 15 people and take a bit from all 15 to find something that works for you. So I cannot stress enough, reach out and ask from others in this space around what they're doing and what they can share. Don't try and reinvent the wheel. It's too much hard work, and it just takes too much time and effort, and you can pick and borrow and steal from others for things that will work for you. Obviously, it took a bit of investment. So we talked about my team structure earlier. We did go to that kind of 4-state manager role, and also our national training coordinator, to address some of those challenges. So simply building an accreditation framework, but not actually being able to implement or kind of reinforce the accreditation framework wouldn't be possible without the structure at head office to be able to do that. I'll touch on the employee contracts for our sample collection personnel later, but obviously the big one there that we're here to talk about today is that framework, which really did set some very clear expectations, which I'll touch on now. I got ahead of myself. So revised structure. So obviously this is Adele, as I mentioned earlier. She is our national training coordinator, and her role really is to be very proactive in this space of trying to identify mistakes in both processes and paperwork that are happening in the field, and then providing really timely feedback to our staff via our state managers to address that performance. Where we have been quite lacking in the past is that we probably haven't done performance management well enough, and we really haven't had a document that has assisted us to do that. And so that's what the accreditation framework really does. It sets those very clear expectations around what we expect, but also what staff can expect of us. So Adele obviously developed that framework, and we'll talk about the process for how we developed that in a couple of slides. But obviously the state managers there, again, are the vital link between our head office and our field. Trying to do this with 150 sample collection personnel from Canberra, you know, it wouldn't be effective. So we have those people on the ground that are able to go out and review and assess and look at our staff in the field to make sure that they're following the accreditation framework. So these are kind of like our anti-doping sample collection Bibles, I call them. And so we have obviously the sample collection staff accreditation framework, which we're all here to kind of learn about. But we also have two manuals. We have a chaperone handbook, which we've developed, and that's for our chaperones. And that kind of talks about the process and procedures for chaperones and what's relevant to them in their role. And then we also have our sample collection manual, which is for our doping control officers. So that's again a book that we actually develop and print and give to our DCOs as a reference. So when they're in the field and they have a question around what they need to do and how they can do it, they can refer to their sample collection manual. We do have it online as well now, so all of our staff have access to that manual online as well, so they can review it. And it has things in there around partials, you know, how to do that, how to notify minors, how to document things that go wrong, and how to modify processes, athletes' rights, responsibilities. It's all in there, and it's in the book, and we print it and we give it to them with the expectation that if they're in the field and they get in trouble, they can look at the book and have a good understanding of what they need to do and how they need to do it. We tend to find that giving them the information reduces the amount of risks that can potentially happen if someone's left to make up their own decisions in a field setting in a high tense environment. So we'll dive into now the kind of process that we undertook for developing our framework. So obviously there were kind of two very clear phases to this, and we're about to come up to kind of our third phase, which I haven't got on here, but we'll talk about. But obviously developing, again, we'll be the first to admit, Adele and I, this wasn't a thing that happened overnight. This has taken quite some time to develop. And I guess this is where, touching back on my point around learning from others and stealing, borrowing and taking from others, is a lot of this hard work has been done by others that we've also picked and stolen from. So don't think that we sit here and develop all of this content ourselves. We take what we like and we make it our own and tweak it to apply it to how it works for us. So obviously we had a good look at reviewing all of our existing policies and procedures and kind of came to the realization that we probably didn't have a clear set of expectations around what we expected of our staff, but also what staff expected of us and how we would handle any things that went skew-if in the field. So if someone, you know, didn't provide a sample the right way, didn't package or seal a sample the right way, there was no real outline of how we would deal with that. So the framework really, it is there to really address and set very clear expectations for staff of what we expect, but also how they will be handled and managed from head office if things go wrong, or even the accreditation phase, which we're here to discuss in a second. So obviously we worked with our internal bodies, our HR team and legal, kind of seeing what we can do and where we can push the boundaries and what we can't do. And then we kind of developed the framework. And then the really important step around what we did, which I cannot recommend highly enough, was we actually consulted with all of our sample collection staff, and the view being that how can you hold staff to a framework if they don't have an opportunity to review it and buy into the process? And so we sent it to all of our staff and gave them 2 weeks and told them to take time, review the document. We paid them to review the document. So we said, whatever time it takes you to review this document, please claim it, because it's a really important document. And if we want you to be bound by the document going forward, you need to have that ability to buy into it. we actually received some really good feedback through that process, and we made changes to our framework. And why that's important is because we were able to communicate back to staff what had happened following the consultation, to be able to say, we took your feedback on, we have changed our framework, and these are the changes. You know, this is a document that is your document as much as it's our document. And so it really was about kind of having that collective understanding around what the document was and how it was going to be used. We then obviously sought some executive endorsement from my boss, Susie, who's our Deputy CEO. And so she signed off on the document, approved it, and now it obviously is in alignment. And what we did was, there was an opportunity for us, being a brand new agency, so Sport Integrity Australia, taking over from SEARADO previously, to review and look at some of our employment contracts and how we had employed staff and the kind of letter of offer. So we made a decision to kind of offer all staff a new letter of employment with Sport Integrity Australia. So effectively said, from this date, you're no longer an employee unless you accept this letter of offer. And part of the letter of offer, there was a requirement that you'd be bound by the sample collection accreditation framework. So we put it in as a kind of an employment condition that you will abide by the accreditation framework, which is a really important step for us in terms of us being able to actually use the framework for the performance management aspects. So instead of just having a document that sits over to the side, we embedded it as part of our employment conditions, so that staff are required to abide by it, which gives us that ability to kind of pull levers or say, hey, failure to comply with the accreditation framework will actually result in your employment with Sport Integrity Australia no longer being considered. So why it's important is really because these are the things that we put into the framework that we wanted our staff to be kind of held to, and these are our expectations. So procedural expectations. So we split that out by both DCOs and chaperones in relation to what their role was in the field and how they were to do that role. We also had some expectations around technology. So I'll touch on it later, but we have a bit of an aging workforce with a large percentage of our workforce over the age of 60. We want to be moving into a paperless technology environment. And so we put some conditions in there around the kind of use of technology and willingness to use and demonstrated ability to use technology. Physical requirements were another one. And again, aligned to a bit of an aging workforce and a workforce that's been recruited probably 10, 15, maybe 20 years ago that, were in peak condition back then, but now might be aging and have a dodgy knee and a dodgy back and can't keep up with athletes and can't climb stairs. And so we actually built in some physical requirements. So again, I'm happy to share our framework with all of you following this. So don't fret and think you have to capture all of these things all at once. So I will share it afterwards, but like ability to climb 2 flights of stairs and ability to walk a kilometre within 12 to 15 minutes. And so some of these things were expectations in relation to what we also want to be having as part of our first phase. So if you link back, you don't want someone who is a chaperone that's actually unable to keep up with an athlete, loses sight of an athlete, or because they're unable to keep up. And so that is kind of why some of the reasons we did it, but also our duty of care to these staff members in relation to saying, we're sending you into a remote environment, sometimes into an athlete's house that we don't know about. We want to make sure that you're actually got some pretty good health behind you so that you can do it. We also had things like driver's licenses and ability to drive at night and in all types of weather conditions. So that's all in there. And then importantly, we also put in some of the personal behavior stuff. And so that really is a big one for us in relation to, you can be a really effective DCO and chaperone without kicking indoors and telling the athlete that they can't do anything. We really focus on making sure that our DCOs and chaperones are really professional, courteous, and really respectful of both athletes and their families when they're dealing with them. So they've got a job to do and they do it really well, but it doesn't mean that you have to be that kind of abrasive and abrupt person in dealing with it. So even things in relation to kind of how you work and share with sports, so gaining entry to venues, stuff like that, we really didn't want our staff just rocking up and saying, we're coming in and there's nothing you can do about it. In a COVID environment, that's become really important in relation to managing expectations with sporting organisations in their COVID bubbles. So we also built in some annual requirements, obviously e-learning and an online exam. So the online exam was an interesting one, which was new to a lot of our staff and they really didn't enjoy it at first. But to us, it's a really good opportunity for Adele to gain a really good understanding of where we need to focus our efforts and training. And so if we're starting to see some patterns and trends in a certain area, then we can adjust our training to make sure that we're addressing that need or concern that we have with staff. We have a minimum of 1 in-field assessment a year. So again, I'm probably happy I can share our in-field assessment with you following this meeting. And that really is a document that either a DCO completes on a chaperone or Adele or one of my state managers will complete on a staff member. So actually in the field, witnessing them notify an athlete, go through the process, and it's a tick and flick. So yes, they do that. No, they don't do that. They need development with that. And we use that to inform whether or not we reaccredit a chaperone or a DCO, or whether or not they need more training in certain areas. We're big believers in the fact that the in-field assessments are really valuable. And again, they do take time and effort, and there is a bit of investment in it, but really critical to have a really good understanding of how they actually interact with an athlete and how they deal with the pressures that come with notifying athletes in either home or multi kind of competition event settings. We also built in a minimum number of missions a year. And so this was to try and address some of our concerns around having staff in the wrong spots, but also having staff that work minimal number of missions and then making mistakes when they do get opportunities. So to us, it was a real risk that you have someone that works 3 or 4 times a year and then gets put back out into the field and is expected to remember everything that they've got to do. So we kind of followed the WADA guidelines that suggest around that 8 missions, and we endorsed that and kept that in. And that's something I think, to be honest, we will look to increase in our next iterations of our framework. So we will continue to build that number in the hope that we have staff working on a regular basis, so their skills are fresh, relevant, and they're not making mistakes through having time away from the role. It is as a chaperone myself, it is a bit of a challenging process sometimes getting back out in the field, having not been out there for a while. So to me, I would really strongly encourage having a minimum number of missions built into a framework. And then obviously failure to meet any of the requirements will result, or potentially may result in the suspension of your accreditation. It's important to note that the framework we developed is for all staff. So it's not just for our existing staff, it is for our new staff as well. So our new trainees that we bring on board. So we hand it to our new trainees, and it's a really clear expectation, and it sets the minimum standards that we require of you in order to be accredited as a trainee. But then our current accredited, it outlines exactly what they need to do and how to do it in order to be reaccredited. And it outlines the process for anyone that doesn't meet any of those, what will actually happen, and the steps that will be taken to address some of those things. So I mentioned earlier our in-field assessment. So that's just a bit of a kind of screen grab from one of them. But obviously, as you can see, it covers all sorts of things. So punctuality in their presentation. So are they in uniform? Are they not? Do they look neat and tidy? And again, that's all really relevant to our first phase of the agency. We want these to be the best advocates for Sport Integrity Australia. They are the people that interact with our main stakeholder, athletes. And so we think it's really important that they do look presented and are obviously on time and responsive. So again, I can share that back to you, but there is an element to it as well that the kind of feedback loop So we provide our staff the opportunity to provide feedback on that form. So this isn't something that's done secret squirrels. We don't do it post the fact and then give someone a bad performance assessment. We do it in front of the person and we have a conversation following the in-field assessment to say, these are the things that I've noted. Is there anything you want to talk about? And then we give, similar to our doping control, we give the person who's been assessed an opportunity to provide a comment as well in relation to their performance. So just closing up, I know that I'm probably running out of time and I think it'd be good to have lots of questions. So some of the challenges that keep me awake at night now. So having moved from being awake because of some other things, I'm now awake for different reasons. And that really is around some of our aging demographics. And so again, you know, using this opportunity to look at lots of faces on the screen that probably face similar challenges. If you have any of these challenges that you've dealt with, I'd be really keen to hear from you about how you've dealt with them as well. This really is a two-way street, right? So, you know, if you've got any ideas or, you know, any of these challenges that you've overcome, I'd be really keen to hear from you about how you've done them. So obviously our Asian demographic, we have a large proportion of our staff over the age of 60. And as you can see there, 22% over 70. And Australia winning the rights to host the Birmingham Games in 2026 is probably the worst thing that could happen to us, because all of our staff are now saying, I'm hanging around and I want to be here until then. And so I'd hate to think of our DCOs, you know, at 80 or 90 trying to collect samples. So they could probably do it, but yeah, it's a bit of a risk to us. So, and obviously having the people in the right place at the right time. And the big one there that I think is really relevant to all NATOs at the moment is that effectiveness of training being delivered both online versus face-to-face. Nothing will replace face-to-face. And I kind of cannot stress that enough. You know, that is where you create a safe space for people to talk and ask questions in an environment that you can bounce ideas off. COVID has been great, where we have been able to have lots of online meetings similar to this that we would never have had before. But there is an element that, you know, people don't want to put their hand up and ask questions because they don't feel comfortable to do so in a group. So, you know, that in the team environment of sitting around having workshop and talking to each other cannot be replaced. But finding the balance between being able to do that and the effectiveness of doing it online is a challenge that we all face. So if anyone does have any really good tips and tricks for training online, yeah, we would be very interested to hear how you have done it. And that's it from me. So I know there's some questions in the chat, but I'm not sure how you want to do this. And there's my email address too, if anyone needs it as well.
Thank you, Mr. Michael, for your webinar. It was very informative, and I believe that there's a lot to pick up from the participants. So we have some questions in the chat from Morel from SEARADO. So can you share with us in a bit in detail the personal qualifications, for example, the age, work background of Sport Integrity Australia?
Yeah, was that in relation to the kind of backgrounds of our staff? So, you know, who they are, what they did in former lives? A lot of our staff are former teachers and come out of either some of the emergency services as well. So police, firemen, paramedics and nurses are a large cohort of our sample collection staff. But overall, it really is a bit of a mixed bag. There's kind of not one profession that we do look for. And when we do recruit, we don't kind of identify any professions that really do work for us. For us, it's really about the people aspect. So what are their skills that they bring and the life experiences they'll bring to be able to have that difficult conversation about trying to gain access to an athlete's house at 6 a.m. in the morning. That's what we really look for as part of our kind of onboarding, is those people skills.
Can I just add a few things, Mike? Thank you very much. I think it was really wonderful to add to your answer to Marielle, who is from Philippines. Michael puts a statement in his slide, which struck me straight away, was recruiting right people in the right places. Yep. Recruiting right people at the right places And I sorry, Sue, if I'm just jumping in to talk about this, because I'm looking at the dynamics of this region over the last 10 years. I've been around here for more than 10 years now. We don't recruit people because we know them or they are friends. We recruit them for their skill set. I like the way Michael said, a good number of them are former teachers. Not that I was a teacher before, all right, which I was, but I think there's also the other element, teachers, former other police officers, etc., because there's a little bit of a integrity which they have been built over the years, yeah, in these professions. So something I like to really touch on. So there, can I just interrupt you, because there are some who have asked a few questions, and maybe if I could just add that, because some of them, Mike, I understand where they are coming from, because I know the dynamics, and maybe it may not be phrased properly. Now, you do over 5,000 tests, and you have showed the number of DCOs you have. We have a NADO here who is actually starting anew, and they do about, let me just see, they do about 300 to 400 tests per year. For someone doing 300 to 400 tests per year, all right, she's asking what is the number of sample collection personnel should a NADO have?
Yeah, that's a really difficult question, and I'll try my best to answer it. I will just add to the point that you mentioned earlier around recruitment of the right people in the right places. And the only thing that I will add to that is that we are very cautious at Sport Integrity Australia around recruiting people that other people have suggested or that other people know. And why we are cautious around recruiting people that others know and are friends with is because, similar to what you mentioned around the integrity, when a positive test does come up and an athlete starts having an interview or an investigation, it's really important that our staff are not best friends and that their stories always, are on the same page and try and cover each other up. So again, yes, really can stress that kind of recruiting people that may be easy at the time, but can create an awful lot of problems down the track. So getting back to the kind of question around the number of sample collection personnel, it really is a difficult one. And so we don't have, as I mentioned, the right people in the right spots. And so New South Wales in Australia is a really good example of how we have the least amount of DCOs in New South Wales, but we collect more samples in New South Wales than anywhere else. And what that is having a problem with us is that we are having staff that are overworked and kind of, we start seeing problems with paperwork errors and process errors because they're starting to cut corners because they need to be somewhere else. So my recommendation around trying to find what the right number is to have a really good understanding of the peak periods that the testing program will be. So are the sports traditionally winter or summer sports? And if they're all focused in one season, then you're going to need more staff than what they would be if they're spread out throughout the year. It's really important also, as I mentioned earlier, to probably not go and recruit 500 staff members because you're not going to have enough opportunities for them all to be proficient in that skill. Yeah, it's a tough one, and I might be able to take it offline and have a think about it in terms of maybe coming up with a bit of an idea. But I'd hate to just throw out a number for you when you aim for that number at the moment. But to me, the basic steps would be identify the peak periods and then try and map the actual number of samples that can be collected in that period. So if you've got, cricket as a sport here in summer, if we know that we collect 100 samples in cricket, I know that we are only going to be able to collect potentially, we're only going to have 5 or 6 missions a week with cricket, and that's going to be across the country. So I'm going to have different staff in different parts of the country. So, it's not just one DCO, it's going to be 5 DCOs because they're going to be in each state and territory, and it's too expensive for us to fly people everywhere. So to me, work backwards, figure out the sporting calendar and then figure out the locations of where those events are likely to be. and then work on a basis of having that kind of one-for-one for what you need to do on that.
Thanks, Mike. If I could just add a few more points with regards to that. We have countries here that are small. We have countries here that are huge, all right? Like Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, you are huge, all right? So I think something you also need to ask yourself, if it's in Philippines, I told Marielle, are there athletes residing in Mindanao, or Davao, or any other place, Visayas or whatever? If they are training there and you don't even have a DCO there, you will incur the cost of flying them there. All right. Likewise, I think Thailand and also Indonesia, you may have athletes in Bali. They never come to Jakarta at all. Okay. So do you have DCOs there? Is it efficient to have a DCO there? Yeah. I think the other thing which I also like to touch on, sorry, in this part of the world, they sometimes tend to be a preference for a certain profession to be a DCO. Okay, say a DCO must be a medical doctor. Sorry, no such thing. All right, that's number one. Number two, also a preference for a certain sex to be a DCO. All right, look, there are athletes, male and female. You got to have an equal number. Yeah. Okay. All right.
I call that the unicorn in Australia, because we've fallen into a very similar trap in terms of looking for DCOs that fit that very specific mold around they can work whenever we need them to, and that doesn't work, right? You know, they're casual employees, and so if we're looking for that unicorn always, we're then hesitant to recruit, and we end up in a problem where we've only got 25 DCOs and we need more, because we're always looking for the perfect candidate. It doesn't have to be a medical doctor. They have no time, right?
Thank you. So take over. So is any other questions there?
We have a question from Mai from Thailand. How does SIA monitor the number of staff participants? Or do you want to further elaborate, Mai?
So I'm assuming, is that in relation to the number of staff that attend and work at missions and collect samples? Is that what that question's about?
Mai, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. Hello, Michael. This is Mai from Thailand.
Hi.
Yeah, I just want to ask you, just like how do you monitor the number the number of the participation of your DCO? So for checking when you just like accredit them.
Yep. So what we do is we are probably I'll say we're prehistoric. So we're still collecting in paper. So I know that some of you might be collecting in paper, but some of you might also be doing paperless sample collection. We still collect in paper forms, and so those paper forms come into head office and they get manually added to Atoms, and we add the chaperone and the DCO into Atoms that have done it, and we can pull reports from Atoms about the number of times that a chaperone's witnessed a sample or the number of times that a DCO has worked. We also have our payroll system. So we have a good understanding of who's getting paid and for what missions, and we make them allocate the mission that they worked towards that pay entry. So we have a good understanding. And then we have I'm not an IT tech savvy person at all, but we have a database that can kind of then hit a button and it generates a report that says Michael has worked 7 missions in this 12-month period. And then our state managers review that and then work up and go, we need to either get that person more opportunities for work or not. We do have very limited oversight in relation to who is being offered work, and that is one of the problems and challenges that I face. So our DCOs engage our chaperones. It would be too much work for us at head office to try and engage chaperones for every mission. So our DCOs do that. So we do have limited oversight over who is being picked for work and who is being offered those opportunities. And that's where that kind of mates with mates becomes a real problem, where you have some staff members not getting offered any opportunities for work or regular. And so the accreditation framework has really helped us because it's highlighted the number of people that are getting work opportunities versus those that are not meeting the 8. And then we're asking those staff that are lower, kind of, why haven't you worked? And then they're telling us, well, we haven't been offered work, or I haven't been, haven't been asked to work in the last 6 months. And so we've been addressing that.
So you're unmuted.
Oh, sorry.
Does
that answer your question?
Yes, I think Mai has also asked. Mai, I think I'll just rephrase it. Sometimes I know where is he coming from. He's actually asking about the monitoring and evaluation of DCOs. Mai, this is a topic Michael will be speaking on in our coming DCO seminar. All right. we know, because that is now part and requirement of WADA's code. Am I right? Is that what you were asking also, Mai? Is that monitoring evaluation?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. So
I'm so sorry. Sometimes it's maybe
no worries,
it's
no worries.
not clear for you.
Don't be silly. Don't be silly at all. So I'm happy to. Do you want me to touch on it now, or do you want me to save it for the webinar that's coming up?
Yeah, well, maybe in 1 or 2 sentences, and then they can listen to the webinar, because we got a whole series of good topics at the webinars. Yeah.
Yeah. So similar to the kind of outline, the requirements in the accreditation framework. So all of our DCOs have to have completed an online exam. They all have to do the mandatory e-learning that we have. So we have developed an e-learning course that we make them do, and that is very situational based. Athlete provides 10 mils, then 20 mils, then 50 mils. How do you bottle? What's the process? And go, tell us the answer. So we use that as a learning opportunity. We also have the in-field assessments. And so for new trainee DCOs, we have them do multiple in-field assessments beforehand. So we do home missions, in competitions, blood missions, multiple athlete missions. And we review and look at all of those, and then head office make an assessment on whether or not we think that that person should be accredited or not. So that decision isn't being made by a fellow DCO, that's being made by someone here in Canberra. And then we have our kind of regular ongoing in-field assessments. So where Adele will go out and kind of sit and watch watch the DCO go through their process, and then provide feedback to them on the spot. And if they do have errors as part of that, we will address that as part of the kind of communications with them. We also have an element where we spend a lot of time and effort and energy in reviewing paperwork errors. So we look at all the paperwork that comes into Canberra and address any performance errors that come into Canberra in a timely manner as part of our kind of ongoing evaluation of our DCOs. And then we have our reaccreditation period every 12 months. So you've got to meet your accreditation requirements in order to be reaccredited. And then there's a process that goes by where it goes from state managers make a recommendation to Adele, Adele makes a recommendation to my assistant director, and then it goes from my assistant director to me. So lots of steps in the process, but it really doesn't allow anyone to get through that shouldn't be getting through and being reaccredited.
Thank you. So
Thank
go
you
ahead.
so much.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. For the next question is from Irene from Anti-Doping Singapore. For the reaccreditation of DCOs and chaperones, does SIA face any cases which they failed the theory or the practical aspects? If so, what was your next step?
Was that practical challenges?
If they were to take the theory and practical, when you do a reaccreditation, you do assess them by theory and practical.
Yes,
and if
if
they fail it, what would you do?
So we don't work kind of on the policy of you fail, you're out. What we do is we work on the policy of you fail the course, we work with you to try and address and correct and provide education to get you up. So there's quite a significant expense and time and energy and effort in getting people onboarded into the agency. So we kind of don't want you to get you in, give you a uniform, you fail the exam and we fire you. To us, it's all about actually that kind of ongoing learning. So we spend a lot of time providing feedback to our DCOs, and it has been challenging because we've come from a position of not providing any feedback to all of a sudden providing lots of feedback. And it has taken a bit of an adjustment, like, why are you telling me I'm doing things wrong? And half the DCOs love it because they look at it and they go, thank you so much. I know where I'm making a mistake, and they're really proud in what they do. And the other half go, why do you keep telling me I'm doing things wrong? And I just look at it and go, you're doing things wrong and you need to change. And if you don't change, then we will have one of these hard conversations. But it isn't a kind of 3-strike policy, you're out. There is definitely a lot of ongoing learning and mentoring that goes into it, that Adele spends lots of countless hours holding hands of DCOs to get them to the point that we're comfortable.
Thank you, Michael. I think I love your points you break up, because we do have similar scenarios in the region. Just to address everybody, we know there have been some reaccreditation going on in some countries going on, and there were instances where people either fail the theory and practical and they're given another chance and they even fail. What Michael is trying to say is, instead of failing them and saying you are out of being a DCO, you don't fail them, you tell them you are yet to pass. Okay, yeah. And then you hold their hands and you have to constantly try them out, really, because you took a lot of energy to recruit them. But again, I like to tell a point here, but in the case of Australia, they took a lot of effort in recruiting them. I am not sure to what extent the countries in our region has really had the rigor in terms of recruiting people. All right. So that also goes back to your first step as to how do you go about recruiting them? What is your criteria for recruiting them? Is your recruitment rigor good and strong and rigor enough to make sure you sieve out those you do not want or don't think they are capable of? I think the other thing which we had and which we want to mention to all member countries here, sometime in SEARADO comes, we do have people, DCOs, who are very familiar, very fluent in your own local language, but not in English. But when the course is conducted in English, we do get some interpreters, etc. We once again like to say that DCOs who are not proficient in English, please try not to send them regionally for any competitions, because when they go there, it's a struggle. I've seen it with my eyes, because they can't speak the language and that becomes an issue. All right. Okay, so just take note, but obviously when they can pick up their language, by all means, do send them for more exposure.
Yeah, just one thing I'll add on our DCO accreditation. And so this is both a really good and a bad example of a DCO that we took 2.5 years to accredit. So we'd appointed the person, we'd recruited them, we picked them for their skills, we thought they were good. And kind of the COVID pandemic hit, they had limited opportunities for work. You know, some of the staff in their local region weren't really supportive of having another DCO come in, and so provided limited opportunities again for that person to learn. And so, yeah, we worked for 2.5 years to get that person to a point that we accredited them. And we had, I don't know how many in-field assessments of that person to make sure that, you know, they failed the partial one time, they failed the notification another time, they failed another bit over there. And so we worked and worked and worked, and we've successfully signed on the dotted line a couple of weeks ago for that person to be a DCO now that we're comfortable. So we don't rush the process either if we're not comfortable. We're not afraid to have that difficult conversation around someone whose performance is not quite right. Our view is the last thing you want to do is put someone into a decision-making capacity or capability without them feeling like they're ready for it. Because the minute a positive test comes back, it all starts with that process. And if that process isn't right, the athlete gets off, and it's just slaps on wrists for every single one of you in the room. You know, the DCO gets fired, but you also get a whack. And so we take that really seriously in terms of how we train our staff and make sure we're comfortable with our staff being out there.
Thanks. Sue, anything else? Any other questions? I think I saw a few more.
Yeah. So the next question is, does SIA chaperones perform sample witnessing?
Sorry, what was that question again?
Do your chaperones perform sample witnessing?
Yeah, they do. So our chaperones are fully accredited. So they are. We have our own training program for chaperones, and they do witness the provision of urine samples, gender for gender. So male, male, female, female. But yes, they are fully accredited, have their own ID cards, and do perform certain functions and roles within the process. We don't use independent parties or witnesses or volunteers from sport. We have our own dedicated chaperone cohort.
Can I just jump in? Anybody has any other questions with regards to this chaperoning? Maybe the bigger countries like Thailand, or Singapore, who has been doing quite a few training on chaperones, etc. Do you allow your chaperones to be sample witnesses also? Yes, Mai?
Yes. Before that, a few years ago, we allowed the chaperone to do that, but sometimes it's not because we have a problem with the age of the chaperone. And before that, before the new code from the WADA, right? And then we decide to ask the DCO to do the witnessing in the toilet with the athlete.
Okay, and Irene has answered that not for Singapore. Is there a reason why not for Singapore, Irene? I'm just getting this discussion going on because the others can also learn. Is there a reason why the chaperones in Singapore do not do the sample witnessing?
Sorry. Yeah. Hello. Hi, Gobi. Hi, Michael. Yeah. Actually, for us, it could because our current number of DCOs is sufficient to actually manage with our test plan. So we actually do not actually train or them to actually witness for our chaperones. Yeah. Although we actually train our chaperones and accredit them with a license similar to a DCO.
So if you accredit your chaperones with a license and they follow a DCO, they just do the notification part and they don't do the sample witnessing.
Yeah,
am I right to
yes.
say that?
Yeah.
Okay. So again, that's because they have sufficient number of DCOs also. And Michael, at this question, I have got a question for you. Do you guys work in pairs or you just send one DCO to the athlete?
We work in pairs,
Okay.
so a DCO and a chaperone, and there are a couple of reasons of why we do that. So one is obviously for workplace health and safety of our staff going into unknown environments. We're having two people a good thing, and the other element of it is that it's also a really good sense check around the kind of process being followed. So we really encourage and train our chaperones to be kind of our eyes and ears if a DCO isn't following the right process, to give them and empower them to speak up, to say, hey, that wasn't quite right. So we do that, but we do have instances where we do have to send just a DCO because that's all we can resource every now and then. But that is a few and far between. We really do prefer to work in pairs for all of our missions.
Good. I think that's a very good information. And also thank you, Singapore, for sharing, Irene. And Mai has also added here, for Thailand, if the chaperone signs a chaperone agreement, we can ask the chaperone to perform the sample witnessing. So they have an agreement in place. Yeah. All right. So for those other countries like Indonesia and Philippines, do take note about all these things because I think you're putting the framework in place. Sue, any other questions, Sue? Good to see. I leave it to you to cover all the questions before I got some other questions.
Yeah, I think
Michael,
we
we are
have one
really
last
making full use of you. Second.
We have one last question in the chat from Azani.
Yeah.
What if they don't meet the requirement of minimum mission numbers, especially in like recent years when the pandemic has hit and the test numbers has reduced significantly?
Yeah, so we're currently going through that process at the moment, and that's kind of phase 3 that I said I'd talk about and didn't. But very good point. So that is where we're actually 1 year in. We've come to our point, which is our 12 months within our first kind of accreditation under the framework. And so we're going through that process now. And what we will do is we will identify those staff that have not worked the 8 missions. We will contact those staff that haven't worked the 8 missions, and we will provide them the opportunity to sort of give some reasons around why they haven't. And that could be, an unwillingness in a COVID environment. That might be that they've been on holidays or they've actually caught COVID and they haven't wanted to work through risk of passing it on. So we will provide those opportunities for staff who haven't met that 8 missions to respond to us first. And then what will happen is we will consider that and make a considered and informed choice based on what their response will be. We may have some that, you know, I've spent the last 6 months after a motorbike crash. And so, you know, that person we may want to keep on, but what we will do is before reaccrediting that person, we may say, we want one more in-field assessment from you, or we want you to complete this online exam before we reaccredit you, so that we're comfortable. It won't just be a tick and flick, you're back, congratulations. We'll put some hoops in place for that person to be reaccredited if they haven't worked 8 missions.
On that matter, if I could also add in, there are countries here where you have huge number of DCOs, but the number of tests you do doesn't require that number of DCOs. So you may want to re-look at that. There have been instances where I say, look, you don't need to train anymore, but you still go ahead and train some more. So if you train so many, I always say with regards to your needs, the number of tests you do average per year, and you could roughly calculate the number of DCOs you require based on whatever we have mentioned, the location, you know, the frequency, etc. So there's something everyone need to look into, yeah? All right. Is there any other questions, Sue?
There are no more questions in the chat.
Okay, no more questions in the chat. Mike, I have a few. One is, really, there's been a very interesting two-way communication here with a lot of these members. Now, in your initial slide, you put something like athlete services and sports operations officers. What is their role?
Yeah, so our sport operations officers, they're the people who identify which athletes to test, when to test, and how to test.
Okay.
I think a lot of countries call them test planners.
Yes.
That's our team that do that. So they sit in my team as well,
Okay.
which is a really nice synergy in terms of trying to manage the competing priorities around wanting to do lots of testing, but having limited capacity or capability or kind of having overflow. We can kind of manage that in-house.
Yeah.
And my athlete services officer is responsible for all of our testing pools. So our registered testing pool and our national testing pool and our domestic testing pool. So our whereabouts compliances. So again, all having it in-house allows us to really make some really good informed decisions around what we do and when we do it.
So who does the risk assessment and test distribution plan?
That's all us. So that's all our sport operations team.
Okay.
That's myself. So I'm responsible for that in the agency. But yeah, my assistant director of sport operations develops all of that. And we do that internally with just not our team, but our investigations team, our intelligence team, our science and medicine team, and our field operations team. So everyone contributes to that risk assessment.
Thanks, Mike. Good. The second question is with regards to the blood collection officer. You said that you have outsourced to a third party. Why was the reason, and why not get within SIA the BCO accreditation, just like DCO accreditation?
Yeah. So really simply put, it's risk and our management of the risk. And so there is an element where it would be really easy for us to go and get some blood collection officials, but the concern being, how do you ensure that that person's skills are relevant and applicable and maintained? And so I like to think of the example, if you go to the doctor and you've had an accident and the doctor's standing there and the nurse is standing there and the nurse says, "Oh, doctor, can you put in a cannula?" Everyone shakes and would rather the nurse do it because the nurse does it every day for a living and the doctor does it once every now and then. It's a similar thing. You know, we would prefer the person that does it 100 times a week to do that, so that there is no risk to our athlete that something goes wrong. They're comfortable doing it, and it's a less risk to the agency in terms of making sure that we don't injure an athlete with any form of venipuncture. So that being said, we are moving and we are looking to try and get some of our own blood collection officials, because it really does allow us to have much greater ability to plan missions where we want to. So we're moving into that space, but one of our big considerations is how do we on a yearly basis, so similar to our accreditation process for DCOs and chaperones, how are we going to reaccredit that BCO's skills in drawing blood? So we're going to try and look to get like a trade organization to come in and actually sit and watch our staff perform the venipunches to be able to say they meet the minimum standards and they can do it. So that's something that we're going to get to, but we've got to put a few more building blocks in place first to kind of make sure I'm comfortable that those staff are still actually able to do it.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah.
All right.
Because there are countries here who have trained phlebotomists, and they have national guidelines that you need to do at least a certain number of work in phlebotomy in order to get yourself reaccredited, and there's a reaccreditation process already nationally. All right. Yeah. So for those countries who have not got the BCOs or intending to do, see what is the kind of national framework you have. If there is no established one, I think there's something what Michael has mentioned, you can probably outsource to a third party. All right. My final one is, again, it has been very, very informative, I must say. And I think it's a question of how all these countries pick it up from where you are, and we go step by step. And again, you did mention that your sample collection, accreditation framework, manual, chaperone handbook, you will be able to share it, isn't it?
Yeah, we can. Very happy to share all of those. And I see there's a question in the chat in relation to kind of, was there a manual that we followed for our development? And the WADA guidelines are exceptional in these bits. So it's all online on the WADA website. There is a kind of a WADA guidelines for a sample collection personnel accreditation kind of framework, I think. And so that came out kind of following 90% of our work. And this came out and I was like, oh, this has just kind of replaced everything that we've done. But that wasn't what it was. So we reviewed what WADA had produced and then took bits that we liked and added it, but also realized that there were bits in there that weren't quite relevant to kind of what we wanted and how we wanted to go as an agency. So there is the WADA guidelines in there that are really helpful as a really good starting place for the kind of minimum standards. And so we accepted the minimum standards, and then we've gone kind of above and beyond based on kind of what we want to do. And I know Adele's not going to like hearing this, but you know, it's a living document. And so we put a year time frame on it. And so we're going to review that document every year. And we're going to continually update and develop that document so that it doesn't just become a document that is put on a shelf and no one looks at anymore. It's going to take, again, that time and effort and energy of constantly reviewing it and updating it. And one of the things that I would like to do is update our number of minimum missions. And, you know, so that's something that we will work through probably for our next iteration of the framework.
Beautiful. I think that is really also resonate with us. We have also from SEARADO taken WADA's guidelines, but we changed quite a bit to suit our region. And a good number of you, when you conduct a sample collection process, personnel training, you have all used those manual. And our trainer has actually kept in touch as who has the manual. And whenever we make the changes, we have been passing you the updated version. Okay, so if those of you who got your own manual, fine, but I think it's good to keep yourself abreast. Okay, fantastic. I don't think I have anything else, and really, we really thank Mike for sharing all this with us, but I'm sure this will be of great use. But people, please take note, don't just take it wholesale, look at it, make sure what is relevant for you, what's the things you need to change. And if you're taking anything specific from the Australian manual, please acknowledge them and tell them. Okay. Sue, anything else? Sue, I think there's one or two more questions, is it? Final one, Sue?
Yes, one last question from Singmi. So she's asking, right, who are the other field staff other than DCOs and chaperones that SIA has? Because from your slide, about 25.
We don't have anyone else. So our sample collection staff are only DCOs and chaperones. So we have the kind of 25 DCOs and the rest are all chaperones that are accredited as chaperones that do witness sample provision, and they do notify. So that is a cohort of staff that are accredited, trained to a standard that we want and perform that role. So that's our field staff cohort, and then we have our head office that support that the field staff.
Thank you.
Great.
All right. I just mentioned and build on what Gobi just said in relation to making things work for you. That is really important, because it's got to be relevant to you. And as I mentioned earlier, it's got to be relevant to your field staff or your sample collection staff as well. Like, they've got to buy into the framework. And that's the biggest learning that we had in relation to the consultation. You know, you've got to send it to them and you've got to say, this is what we expect of you and this is what you can expect of us. Are you happy to be bound by this framework? You know, like, this is your choice to provide feedback to change it. And then as an agency, you really have to consider that feedback. And if there is anything in there that does need changing based on feedback, you need to change it. Because it shows that it's a document that both of you are buying into, both head office and field and sample collection staff. So there's obviously going to be non-negotiables. So if someone comes back and says, I only want to work 2 times a year, you know, you can say, no, that's not going to work for us. But, you know, if they say we only want to do 1 online exam a year and you're comfortable with only doing 1 as opposed to 2, then, you know, change it, but have another thing, add something else, say, you know, online requirements, and send it another way. You know, there's always ways, but to me, it's about getting consultation with staff and making them buy into the framework. If you don't get their buy-in, it becomes really hard to then enforce.
Fantastic, thank you. I think I'll rephrase to Mai's question. Mai had a question. He asked if your testing staff, when you say your testing staff, your full-time staff, which is looking at the risk assessment, the TDP, the testing pool, do they also perform the DCO function?
No, yes and no. It's the technical answer. Because one of my state managers is a DCO. So they were a former DCO and they applied for the state manager role, and they are a DCO. So, but that person does not work as a DCO as our first port of call. That person is a state manager, and their responsibility is to manage the staff in that state. If we run into problems where we have a world record and no other DCOs can go, then we will send that person. Or if they're at a mission doing some in-field assessments and all of a sudden 2 or 3 athletes arrive and there's a bit of a backlog, that person might be able to jump in and help out. So myself, I'm the director of the team. I am a chaperone as well. So I do go out and I attend missions and work as a chaperone, and I'm very clear in my role. I'm only there to be a chaperone. I only notify and witness sample provision. I don't make any decisions. So it's really important, I think, as leaders of these teams, that you do have a really good understanding of what the situation is on the ground. And so if you're not a current chaperone, to me, I strongly encourage that you do kind of get yourself accredited as a chaperone via the proper channels, not just give yourself the accreditation, but, you know, go out and work to a DCO and have one of the DCOs accredit you. To me, it really has helped me make decisions around what they do and how they do it with a knowledge of how it actually works. And so for me to be able to say to my staff, I'm also bound by the framework in terms of I have to do my 8 missions a year, I have to do my online exam and my e-learning, to me is a really good bar to set for your staff to show that you're invested in this framework as well.
Thank you, Mike. I think that's wonderfully said. And I can understand why these questions are coming. These questions are coming because there are big NADOs here whose staff is overwhelmed with all this paperwork, testing pool, coordination, etc. At the same time, they also started off as DCOs. They don't want to lose touch with it. All right. And it is good that if you can have a balance, because being a DCO, they also get the opportunity for exposure overseas too, is for them to pick things up. So again, see what is done, as like Michael said, you two need to go through the proper tests, etc. Make yourself accredited. We all need to play through. Yeah. I think that's the last question, right, Sue? Wonderful. I think this is very, very interesting webinar we had. It was a last minute one, but it's a very useful, practical one. I thought I'll say a last few words too, is this. We are having our seminar, a DCO seminar, SEARADO DCO seminar on the 5th of July. I believe all your member country representatives and operations point of contact have been told already, and all your DCOs have been informed about the dates, because on the 5th, both the morning section is from 9 to about 12 and the afternoon section is about 3 to 5:30. We have lined up a series of very good topics for all DCOs. Yeah, Michael will be coming again and you'll be talking about the monitoring and evaluation of DCOs. We have somebody from IPC talking about testing the special population. We have someone from WADA to reinforce what are the new things in the code. We have someone from an independent observer, a games organizer, and IDCO giving their perspectives. That's another very good one. We will give you the program very soon. Okay, all right. That's it, Sue.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gobi. Thank you, Michael, for this webinar. Before we go, can we on our video and take a photo?
Oh yeah, we got to do some marketing, Mike. There you see everyone's great photographs, pictures. Okay, so give them a few minutes, okay? They got to do their hair and all that, you know. Anybody else coming on? Yeah, some more. Junior, Ulan, yeah. Lucky, hey. Hi, hey, how are you?
Okay, can I take a photo now?
Yes, you may take a shot.
1, 2.
Have you taken?
Okay.
All right, thank you very much. Really, once again, thank you very much, Mike. Are you going to be in Lausanne or?
No, I'm off to Canada for a family holiday, so very excited.
Oh, yeah, you're mentioning, yeah. All right, have a good one, and thanks to your colleague too for sitting in, and thanks to all of you. And I think this will be a start of a very good relationship with SIA, as they are also seeing how we can work together. All right, thank you, and have a good day. Bye.
Thank you.